To begin this project, let's have a look at the different kinds of files that I'm giving to you. First off, there's three different kinds of charts. There's a bar chart, there's a line chart, and finally there's going to be a pie chart. Each one of these, I'm showing you what the final result will look like in a static form. What we want to do is to focus on animating each of these charts so that they appear on your screen in a kind of an interesting little way. We want them to either swipe in or maybe rotate in or in somehow create some dynamic little effects that we otherwise couldn't do with just a static image. To help you through this, with each of the charts, I'm also giving you a blank chart where all I've done is taken away the chart elements that we're going to animate so that you can animate those on top of this. In other words, you will not have to recreate every little part of these different charts. I only want you to focus on animating the lines, the graphs, and the bars that are on different charts. The final thing I'm giving to you for each chart is the different elements that we're going to animate isolated by themselves. So as we place these into our animate document, you'll see exactly where they should go, and we'll create some template layers on top of these. So every chart has a blank chart to it. So this one's for the line. And then finally I give you the lines by themselves. And then there's a pie chart that's blank. And then we're going to recreate this pie chart in Adobe Animate. So let's jump into Adobe Animate and let's create the first chart, which is going to be our bar chart. Once it's launched, we'll create a new document by clicking on Create New. And the size of each of these charts is going to be exactly the same. We want the width to be 1370 pixels by 790 pixels tall. So 1370 by 790. We'll keep our frame rate at 30 and our platform type to be ActionScript 3. Now when I say create, this will give us a new document that's the exact size of our bar charts that we're working on. In order to zoom out so you can see the entire work area, the first thing I like to do is to go up to the very top and let's choose Show All or Show Frame. And this will back out so we can see our work area nicely. Next, let's go down to our timeline area so we can see our layers. And this bottommost layer is going to be our background layer, which we're going to place our blank timeline on. So I'm going to double click the name of it and call it background. And with it selected, let's go up to File and let's import to the stage our blank background template. When you import something to the stage, it's going to place it right in the open area. We're going to do the blank bar chart first, so make sure to choose the blank one and say Open. And this will place it nicely inside the area the exact size it needs to be. Next, let's make a new layer and bring in each of our different blank bar charts. So again, return to your timeline, click on the little plus sign to make a new layer on top of your background, and I'm simply going to call this my template layer. We'll lock this down and kind of drop the opacity so that it's out of the way in just a moment. With your template layer selected, let's go up to File, back down to Import, and again, let's import it to the stage. This time, choose the bar PNG file. When we say Open, this will bring in our document and place it right where it needs to be too. What we're going to do is to create a new layer for each of the different rectangles that you see. And we want to be able to see below it and get this out of the way. So to turn this into a true template layer, if you go down to your template options, you can double click on the blank area off to the side. Double click on the icon. There we go. And this will bring up your layers properties. You can drop the opacity of it and you can lock it down at this time too. With this done, when we say OK, now you can see it's a little bit lower and I can see the other stuff that's on top of it. Now let's create a new layer for our May rectangle. Going down here, we'll make a new layer again. I'll call this the May Rect. Notice that I don't add spaces between those. That's one persnickety thing that Animate doesn't like, is spacing in between their layers. And that has to do with the interactivity. Long story short, just make sure you don't have layers. While I'm down here, I'm going to click on the little lock icon and lock down my background so I don't accidentally select it. So with the May rectangle layer selected, I'm going to go into my toolbox and let's locate the rectangle tool. Notice that you've got a rectangle and a rectangle primitive tool. For the purposes of what we're going to be working on, let's just keep it at the regular rectangle tool. With this selected, let's go over to our Properties panel. And inside our Properties panel, this is where we can choose to change the fill and the stroke color. I want my fill color to match this pretty pink magenta of the tin. So I'm going to click on Fill Color. And with this, you can see I get a little eyedropper tool that will allow me to pick up whatever color I hover over. So very quickly, I'm going to click very carefully on the tin, and that will pick up the, or it should have picked up, let's try it again, pick up the magenta that it should be. Now to save the swatch so I can use it later, we can open up our Swatches panel and click on the plus sign at the very bottom right to save a new copy of that swatch. Finally, with our rectangle tool, we can go down to the bottom of our rectangle and simply click and drag and draw over that particular area. If yours is off by a little bit, that's okay. I'm not going to count off if it's minorly not lining up 100% perfect with the edges. Now, with it created, in order to animate any kind of object, we need to convert it to a symbol. So I'm going to use my black arrow selection tool and make sure that it's selected. With it highlighted, go up to Modify and choose Convert to Symbol. Notice the keyboard shortcut is F8, which is a good one to know. When you convert it to a symbol, it's going to ask to give it a name. I'm going to call this my May rectangle. Do make sure the type of symbol is a graphic, and you can keep your registration in the middle. Everything else will keep the same, and say OK to that. Now that it's a symbol, you can see on our timeline we've got a keyframe set, and it should have a blue bounding box around it. If you don't have a symbol created, you cannot tween that, which means we cannot effectively animate it. I'm going to step through and create the 3 other rectangles, and each of these rectangles is going to have its own separate layer. So again, I'll go down to my timeline, make a new layer. This will be for June as its rectangle. With the June rectangle layer selected, let's grab my rectangle. I'll click on my color swatches for my fill color and pick up the yellow. And if I want to, I can create a new swatch inside of here. Whoops. Do make sure that the yellow is highlighted though. There's my fill. I won't worry about saving the swatch for now. I'm just going to create my rectangle. Finally, we'll select it and then go to Modify and convert it to a symbol. Again, we'll call it the June rectangle. To the next, for July, we'll go back down to our timeline and make a new layer. Grab our rectangle tool and set our fill color to be that green. We'll click and drag and redraw it. Use your black arrow selection tool to select the green rectangle. Go up to Modify and convert it to a symbol. And finally, let's do August. Remember, everything needs to have its own individual timeline. So make a new layer for August. Grab your rectangle tool and let's set the fill color. May have to scoot over to see it. To be the bright orange. Draw it off. And then use your black arrow selection tool to select it and go up to Modify and convert it to a rectangle as well. Now that we have 4 different rectangles, each one on its own separate layer, let's go through and see how we can animate this. Let's say that I wanted each of these rectangles to rise up from the bottom to the topmost point where it is, and for it to do that in half of a second. Now if I look at my timeline, I know that 1 second equals 30 frames, and so half a second is going to be 15 frames. So if I want my animation to last 15 frames for each of the rectangles, let's take it one rectangle at a time. I'll pull up the bottom of my timeline so I can see this just a little bit better. There we go. First, let's look at May. I'll zoom in on it. I'll choose the May rectangle layer, and I'm going to go over to the 15th keyframe for that layer. With it selected, you can right-click or control-click on it and choose to insert a keyframe. Notice this will add a little point right there, and it looks like all of the background and all the other layers have disappeared. Well, that's simply because there aren't any frames that are active for this point in time. So if we want to be able to see something like our background, let's also select the background layer, and instead of inserting a keyframe, I'm going to right-click or control-click on it, and let's just insert a blank keyframe, or just a regular frame. Insert frame. Notice now this fills in the area of time, but it doesn't add a changing keyframe to there. We'll do the same for our template layer. So right-click on it and choose Insert Frame. And this will insert that and give us the rest of our information as well. Going back to our May rectangle. So at 15 frames, with this one selected, we want it to be fully at the top, standing up as a rectangle. To start off, we want the first keyframe, so going back on our timeline to keyframe number 1 on this, for the rectangle to be solid and flat. So to transform this down and to flatten it down, I'm going to select my rectangle, and this time we're going to choose our free transform tool. It's underneath our selection tool. With the free transform tool, in order to move this around, if you click on the top and drag down, you can see both edges are going to move at the same time, and that's not what we want. Instead, hold down the Option or the Alt key when you click on the topmost point, and when you drag down, this will allow you to transform it from that edge. And we're simply going to drag it all the way down till it's near 0 right there. So for keyframe 1, it'll be down until it reaches the topmost point and comes back up. Now let's add our tween animation. Going back to frame 1, control click on that first keyframe, and at the very top we're simply going to add a classic tween. This will allow you to animate everything in between, and you can see how it will rise up from there. Pretty cool. Let's do the same thing for the June, July, and August rectangles. I'm going to zoom back out. We'll select the June rectangle, going back to keyframe number 1. With it selected, go down to our timeline so we can see it, and let's insert a keyframe for frame 15. So again, control click and insert a keyframe. This means there's going to be a change. We'll go back to frame number 1, and let's squash down this rectangle. So hold down your Option key as you click on the very top, and again I've got my free transform tool. Let's bring it all the way down till it's just about at the bottom. You may not be able to get 100%, but that's okay. With this down on frame 1 and up on frame 15, when you right click or control click on the first keyframe, we can create a classic tween between those. And now you can see it all comes up at the same time. Finally, let's back out. Let's go to the July keyframe. With it selected, down on our timeline, insert a new keyframe, right click, keyframe, return to frame number 1. With frame 1 selected with your free transform tool, hold down the Option key as you click and drag down to the very bottom. With frame 1 having it down, we can right click or control click on frame number 1 and make your classic tween. Let's test it out. Now you can see it rises up really good. Finally, let's do our August rectangle. Return to the timeline, select frame number 15 and control click on it. We're going to insert a keyframe, return to frame 1, choose your quick selection, or excuse me, your free transform tool, hold down the Option or Alt key, and let's bring it down to the bottom. Once frame 1 is down, then you can right click on frame number 1 and add your classic tween. Now let's test out our movie once our timeline is all set. Another way you can test your movie is by clicking on the play button in your timeline. You can see how it goes from bottom to the top. If you want it to loop over and over again without having to press the play button, you can also turn on looping. This will give us a little set of arrows in between there, and you can set these arrows between your starting and stopping points, and now when you play, it'll play them over and over again. Now let's see if we can clean up our animation and our layers. Going down to our timeline, we don't need our template layer, so with it selected we can hit the trash can and get rid of it. And as we play, I'm going to turn off my looping. Right now, all of these are coming up at exactly the same time. However, you can stagger the starting and stopping time for each one of these, and sometimes that'll give you some dynamic effects. For instance, let's see if I can offset this by about half or a quarter of a second. Going down to my timeline, so I want May to start and stop right where it is, but I want June to start a little bit after that. I'm going to select the first keyframe, hold down Shift, and select my last keyframe. From here, I can click carefully on that first keyframe one more time and simply drag the entire selection over until it's about midway through that animation. You can now see it's not going to show up and start until halfway through. Let's do the same for the July and August. Again, select the first, hold down Shift and select the last. We'll then click and drag and stagger it about halfway through. And then for August, select the first, hold down Shift, and then carefully click and drag and move it over to here too. You can see when we do this, however, it's going to cause our background to go away eventually. So scrolling over to the last keyframe, and in our case it's on frame 37, I'm going to insert some blank keyframes for all of these remaining layers. So with that layer selected, we'll right click on it, and let's insert, not a blank keyframe, just a regular frame here. And let's do it for the other ones too. Insert a frame, and finally insert a frame there. Now when I play it, you can see they come up at different times. So there's a lot of different ways you can play around with this. If you want to make it go faster, it's simply a matter of moving your keyframes closer together, or if you want it to take longer in time, you can have the keyframes spread out. This is one thing I encourage you to play around with as you create your own animations for your own graphs. Once you're finished with this, the last thing we need to do is to save this up. We'll go up to File, and let's save our document if you haven't already. And I'm going to call this my animated bar chart. Notice that the file format is going to be a native animate document, which is .fla. When we say save, these documents, these Flash or animate documents, are what you're going to upload to Moodle for this assignment. The last thing you can do for the purposes of your portfolio is to save these as animated GIFs or as movies. To create an animated GIF, simply go up to File and down to Export, and you can see there's a variety of different formats to choose from. One of them is the animated GIF. With it selected, it'll give you a simple little preview of what it will look like and the size of it. You can play around with the different settings, including changing the size, changing the number of colors. In my case, maybe I don't want it to be so large, so I'm going to scale it down by about 50%. Now when I click Save, this will ask me where do I want to save it to, and I'll save it to my desktop. Now on my desktop, I should have an animated GIF of our bar chart. And it's going to loop over and over again as we did before. The only thing you're going to be responsible for turning in for this project are the animate files. So that .fla file is what you need to upload.